Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me loud and clear. Welcome to another Quincus talk session. The main objective of today's webinar is to connect you with industry experts working face-to-face with today's biggest cybersecurity risks. You get to hear from our panelists today about how companies at the forefront of cybersecurity proactively approach risks and identify vulnerabilities. Now, the topics to be covered today include identifying weaknesses in your supply chain, minimizing access to private data, and last but not least, vendor due diligence. Now, we are absolutely privileged to have two industry experts joining us today, Sam and Thibault, and I would like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and it would be great if you could briefly share your role and responsibilities as well. Could we start with Sam? Sam, I think you're on mute.
Apologies. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for that, Jay. My name is Sam Parmar, and I am Head of Strategy and Technology for CYFIRMA. CYFIRMA is a pioneer and leader in external threat landscape management. We help companies from executive to operation level quantify the risk posed to organization, providing predictive, personalized, actionable cyber intelligence. My responsibility within the organization is really to set the tactical and strategic sort of foresight for the organization. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Sam. Now I'll pass the mic over to you, Thibault.
Yes, thank you, Jay. So I'm currently head of fulfillment sales team at Rakuten France. So for my late experience, I have more than 5 years of expertise in commercial management and e-commerce and marketplace. So I used to work at Rue du Commerce, Mano Mano, Rakuten France, and I manage a B2B marketplace. And I'm also lecturer and a business at Business and Digital Master School, where I share my knowledge of e-commerce and marketplace to students in master's degrees. And at Rakuten, so I manage the sales team to sell our fulfillment network to Europe and maybe in the next years in the world.
Thank you so much. And my name is Jae Lee. I currently serve as VP Engineering at Quincus, and I'll be your host today. We're based in Singapore, and what you kind of see in the background or not is Singapore Marina Bay Sands. So before we drill down into the questions and the topics of today, I would like to start with a short statement about cybersecurity. Many say that the pandemic has necessarily shattered most of the few remaining restraints on cloud adoption. Now, decades of innovation and learning at scale have enabled swift and effective mobilization of distributed teams like remote work, and also engagement with customers and users. This COVID-19 crisis has spotlighted the value of IT in craftsmanship and deploying quick and cost-effective solutions to keep things running. Just like the pandemic has taught us, no organization, big or small, strong or weak, can be immune to the threat of cybersecurity breaches. And cybersecurity has to be second nature in the digital age. For example, lapse security leading to identity or intellectual property breaches can have an immediate impact on livelihoods. Also, product launches can be delayed. Logistical supply chains can be disrupted. And I think we've heard a few times already in the news related to such events. Now, on to the first topic. I believe our audience would like to hear from the panelists about identifying weaknesses in our supply chain, which is the first topic at hand. Now, the first question is, what is the purpose of and the goal of cyber attack? Sam, would you care to share your thoughts about what the hackers are trying to achieve here through these cyber attacks?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jay. So let's just look at what a supply chain cyber attack really is, right? It's a target on a trusted third-party vendor or company who offers services or software vital to the supply chain, right? If you look at the numbers, since 2021, we've had a 200% increase in supply chain attacks, right? The European Union of Cyber Agencies predicts a fourfold increase in cyber attacks in the next 2 years. So these are big numbers, right? As you mentioned, Jay, as part of your introduction, right? Companies now have sort of increased their digital and technology adoption, right, across their whole business, which is fantastic. They're getting the business benefits, they're getting the productivity, they're also getting the insights. However, what used to take months and years in terms of this sort of digital transformation has now taken days or weeks. And as part of that transformation, cybersecurity wasn't really even considered, right? Leaving a playground of vulnerabilities and exposures for cyber criminals to exploit. And a lot of these companies are way below the poverty line of cyber controls and cyber defenses, right? Now, if you look at the adversary, they're opportunists. They're always looking for the path of least resistance. So from a cyber perspective, they're continually scanning and doing reconnaissance of your company and your people. So what does your attack surface look like? Are there any vulnerabilities that can be exploited from that? Are there any credentials on the dark web that can be used? You know, there's a saying, companies need to get things 99% of the time, right, 99% of the time. Cyber criminals only need to get it once, and they're in your environment. On top of that, if you see quite a few of the reports from one of the big organizations, they're basically saying cyber attacks, 95% of cyber attacks will be attributed to misconfigurations by humans. You know, that is a big, big number. So on top of that, there are so many threat actors and agendas, right? I mean, on our platform, we're tracking 700 threat actors and over 2,000 campaigns targeted at organizations. And anyone can be a threat actor these days, right? I mean, you have ransomware as a service. You don't need to be a technical person to launch an attack on an individual or an enterprise or a small to medium business. You have threat actors providing these as tools and services, ransomware as a service. And you also get this as a 24/7 hotline for support. So, you know, attacks can happen in many, many ways, right? And the most common we see is via social engineering or phishing attack, right? Where the threat actor is trying to get you to divulge some sensitive information that they can use for their campaign. There could be a malicious payload, right? That could be from either an email attachment or within a site. So when you download the payload, a script runs, and that is then the start of your cyber attack. There could also be credential theft. So, you know, data breach of your system or non-corporate systems. You know, you've still got individuals that are using corporate username and passwords for their personal applications. And, you know, the risk there obviously is if a personal application, there's a data breach, you now have your credentials, your corporate credentials, username and password out there being transacted on the dark web. And of course, you know, you've got the more rudimentary style of password guessing, brute force attack, use of well-known passwords. Yeah, and social engineering, which we actually discussed just a little bit a while ago. Thibault, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, from my side, what we saw at Rakuten, and despite for attack in cyber attacks for supply chain, we saw that many hackers can find some, you know, can attack you directly to commercial software products, and that's kind of something we need to take care in our companies, because we need to focus on, okay, what I want in terms of products, in terms of software, and etc. But we also need to see if the software we want to use is well protected by the companies that we are going to sell it on our company. So that's something we already lived. So maybe we'll talk about it later. But yeah, for me, a supply chain attacker can penetrate into a software company system or compromise the integrities of their products, they can also gain an access to a great numbers of targets. So that's what we want to focus on Rakuten, to be sure that the products we are using are well protected, and we have a great how do we say, sorry for my kind of English, sometimes I need to search for my words, but yeah, we focus on which company we are working at, which providers we work.
Thank you so much. I would definitely have to second the opinions shared today with this first topic. Just to point out a few about the aggressor just needing to be right once. I think we can't deny the fact that that one time, one event actually messes everything up. Also, I like the fact that, Sam, you mentioned that a system could be, or infrastructure could be fault tolerant, but it's the human error or it's the lack of competence that actually creates a loophole or a backdoor or whatever the event may be, which actually leads to data breaches and security risk, not just the system itself being at fault. So thank you for recognizing and sharing this with the audience. I'd like to move over to another topic. When it comes to cybersecurity or information security processes, for that matter, I believe prevention, detection, and response comes to mind. And speaking of which, when it comes to breaches, how do data breaches usually happen? Is there any security measures that organizations should usually follow, or how to better prepare themselves throughout these security processes? I'd like to hear our panelists speak a little bit about the different processes that allows and empowers organizations to respond, but prevent, but also to detect these kind of potential threats. How about we start with Thibault?
Yes, sorry. You mean about how do we minimize access to private data, etc.? So
yes, just some processes that you would recommend or suggest, or use cases that Rakuten follows to address the different security processes that would need to be addressed, whether it's for detection,
yeah, of course.
prevention.
Yeah, so to counter some supply chain attacks, company can incorporate a number of strategies in all cases. It's of course important to deploy strong security policies to allow only authorized application to run for your collaborators. So that's why I explained before at Rakuten, we are really focusing on which projects we are and which software we are using. So for me, we have many different solutions, but for me, we have maybe mains. It's of course it's depending of the business and architecture of the companies, but the main two for me, it's first evaluate the security strategy of your suppliers. So you need to make sure that the suppliers you work with have an implement a real defense and securities strategy for their products. And it's important in your contracts to highlight this point before signing and have the new software. You need to check with this company if everything is well set up about cyber attacks. After, it's mainly something we need to talk about long term, but of course you need to make an audit and of unapproved IT infrastructure. So it means that you make to be sure that the software used by employees meets securities requirements as data transfer, sharing with third party, etc. So it's really important to know which software your collaborators are using. And the last one for me, and it's a little bit with the second one, it's to have an update, so an up-to-date and efficient inventory of your software assets. So we need to understand that every software have potential vulnerabilities, and with an up-to-date inventories of all your software used by your organization, or maybe people inside or outside your organization, you need to identify applications, identify the updates and upgrades that may present security issues. Because every time you are using a software and it will be have some maybe some updates or upgrades, it will maybe add some breach to your securities. So you need to focus and to check every time that you have an update to be sure that your company is not in danger, and check with your IT teams, but with some other teams also. And I think we will talk to it later, but it's not only an IT issues, it's companies issues, of course.
Thank you. Sam, would you care to chime in?
Yeah, Thibault, those are some really good points there. I would probably just take it up a little bit of a level, and I would say, look, with cybersecurity, it's a defense in-depth approach, right? You have to be brilliant at the basics is what I call it. So when you look at the controls, whether it's protect controls, detect controls, monitoring controls, response controls or capabilities, you have to be brilliant at those basics. So, Thibault mentioned around patch and vulnerability management of your software assets. You've got to make sure that these things are in place, operational and effective, and how you're testing it, how you're getting the visibility that these controls are effective. I think ultimately organizations need to have a risk management framework. They need to understand what is the risk to the organization, whether it's internal to the organization, whether it's dealing with a third party. What is the overall the risk there? What is, that clearly states the crown jewels to the organization, the potential risks, the impacts, both financial, reputational, legal impacts, if any risks were to materialize. On top of that, as Thibault mentioned, you need to have a leadership team that understands the cyber risk and supports the agenda of cyber controls to protect the business. Now, that is a very, very key point, because without support, you're not going to get budget. Without getting the budget, you're not going to be able to deploy the control. So I think there's two ways you can really look at this. And companies, I think, need a different approach when it comes to cyber defense or cyber controls. A lot of companies are only looking at internal controls inside the perimeter, which is required, but it's aggressively reactive, right? You need an approach that is telling you that something is being planned, right? What does your entire attack surface look like, or your digital footprint look like? What are the critical vulnerabilities and exposures to your external assets, which could be the inroads for cyber criminals? What could potentially be used against me, whether it's brand impersonation, whether it's impersonation of my executives, whether it's impersonation of my IP, right? And data leaks, right? That is another key one. Is there any data leaks? Is there any credential leaks? Is there any leaks of my privileged access accounts? And really then understanding who the threat actors are that are targeting you. What are they interested in? Why are they interested in you? And how ready are they to attack? So it provides visibility of your complete external threat landscape, of any gaps, remediations that need to be addressed, and how the company can mitigate any planned attacks to mitigate risk. So yeah, that's a concept that we talk about is know yourself, know your enemy. And obviously, cyber awareness and training, that is the big one as well, right? We talk about the human firewall is your strongest and your weakest link, right? So doing just-in-time training to not only your employees, but everyone within your organization of the risks and the dangers of cybersecurity. And again, getting the basics right. What is phishing? What is the requirements of a strong password? Why is it essential not to be using your corporate username and password for personal use? And then, of course, traditional controls that everyone is required to implement, whether it's cyber processes, whether it's protection tools, whether it's detection tools, monitoring and response. So it's a defense in-depth approach there, Jae.
These are some amazing insights. And if I may attempt to summarize a bit based on what are some keywords that I took that our audience, I believe, can also remember, is from Thibault. I think you mentioned something quite interesting, because as we're talking about cybersecurity and InfoSec, it's not just the actual product that we are developing or providing as a service. It's also our environment that pertains to developing our product and services that we have to ensure the security of, such as the tools that you mentioned. I believe you're also referring to not just the code base, but it could even be the authoring tool that is being utilized, or it could be a HRMS that is used in operation. And from Sam, there's so many gems that you have also laid out. But one thing that I took away quite importantly was all the security controls, policies, and processes, and the different events that needs to happen can only be done right if this is a top-down approach and a top-down awareness, and also back from top-down management, rather than trying to just put in processes and also have these certain events like training. Because I do believe any organization, especially when you're providing a SaaS solution in the supply chain, but not limited to, it is quite important that the entire organization needs to be aware. And I do agree with you that it has to happen from top down. All right.
Absolutely. And if I may, if I may just add a point to that, back to your point in the introduction, right? Businesses are now embracing technology to advance their business, their operations. Cybersecurity needs to be an enabler and embedded within the business. It can't be something that, you know, the IT part of businesses, and it needs to be treated as a business risk, because it is. Because you know, if there is a breach, it's not just an IT problem. You're impacting business operations, potentially safety of your people, and you've got financial, legal, and reputational ramifications, which is obviously going to hurt the bottom line.
I absolutely agree with you. And within the scope of our main theme of cybersecurity, I believe data governance is also becoming quite a focal point for many SaaS businesses, including but not limited to the supply chain that we're talking about today. So it's difficult to deny that data security is also a critical element within the umbrella of data governance. So speaking of data governance and data security, what are some best practices that the panelists can share with the audience about managing sensitive data and also minimizing access to sensitive or private data that's not necessarily should be that easily approached or accessed? Sam, would you care to share?
Yeah, sure. So let me just set the context here, right? So data in the dark web is being bought and sold over and over again, right? And that data includes your IP, your PII, your CII, your sensitive information, even code. And the motives of this are really corporate espionage, targeting executives, hurt brand or the image, impact to stock prices, geopolitical, geopolitical national interests, to cause massive disruptions to critical infrastructure. Lastly, financial gains, right? Data is the new gold. So protecting the data that is critical to you and your business is key. Now, a couple of things that when you're looking at protecting data is you need to understand or be clear on what you want to protect. What is actually crucial to me? What is private data? What is confidential data? What is IP data? And the life cycle of that data, right? Where is it created? Where is it stored? Who do we share it with? Ongoing monitoring and visibility across your social surface messaging platforms and dark web communities to sort of identify if there has actually been a breach and proactively what you need to do about it as a company, right? So, you know, to look at what can be done here to protect your data. Again, it's a defense in depth approach, right? In protecting data. One, understanding your data, where it sits, how you produce it, and the life cycle of that data. Two, from a cyber intelligence perspective, understanding you know, who would be interested in that data, why are they interested in it, what are they interested in, and how ready are they to come and attack that, or come and go after that data. Then you look at controls like your monitoring and detection controls, whether it's your data protection, whether it's your network controls, whether it's your application controls. You then look at encryption tools. Encryption tools, for example, persistent controls on your files, or database encryption or application encryption of your data. And then, lastly, looking at the concept of least privileges, only providing access to that data on a need-to-know basis. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thibault, would you care to chime in as well on this topic?
Yeah, I think I have no more something to add. I think Sam share well his experience and what we need to do as a companies to ensure the attacks and to be clear in our organization. So I think Sam was the best in this topic. So I let with this kind of information.
I appreciate your comment as well. What I took away from Sam's comment was, I think there was a very basic fundamental insight that you've shared, Sam, which is know your data. And to know your data, you have to be able to define your data. And based on how you define your data, you come with a strategy that pertains to each definition of the data, rather than randomly adding some events or controls, which might not be relevant to the type of or how you define your data. So I think you've actually addressed something quite fundamental, but very critical, which is easy to forget because I believe there's a lot of tools out there and services that sells you the component of cybersecurity right off the bat, without really having to know what's being provided, or without even yourself knowing what is your data. So thank you so much for that insight, that emphasizing that you have to know your data first before you come up with a strategy.
Yeah, absolutely, Jay. And look, when we're talking about supply chain, once you understand your data, you can then apply a risk-based approach on that data or data types that are now being shared to your third parties, to your fourth parties, right? Because if you are sharing critical customer data, critical information that is critical to your business, you would want to apply a risk-based intelligence controls to that third party. But if you're just sharing, trivial information to another third party, you wouldn't want to apply the same controls on that third party that you're sharing PII information or customer data with. So it's a very pragmatic viewpoint of cyber controls once you understand the data, your data. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to dig a bit deeper about data. Now, while companies benefit from data collection, and we're not just talking about social media websites, but even within supply chain, and for Quincus for that matter, we also deliver business intelligence by providing visibility over end-to-end supply chain and the journey of a package, for instance. Now, not just limited to Quincus, but I think in general, there's a lot of benefit when you collect and understand data. But even with the purpose of better serving your own customer and users, I think business needs to balance the transparency and security in their processes and security controls for the stakeholders as well. Having said that, if I may ask something that was a little bit more elaborative, maybe a use case, is it possible to actually set a strict data governance policy while providing something that enhances the product usability at the same time? Sam or Thibault?
I can take that.
All right, Sam.
Yeah, so back to my point, Jay, was cybersecurity needs to be looked at as a business enabler, right? So when you're looking at, say, for example, a data governance strategy, that needs to be encompassed or developed not just by the business. The cybersecurity needs to be part of that. And there are ways, there are tools, there are methods to be able to enable that business, but also protect the data and also be fully in control of that data when we're talking about data governance, right? So it should be a multi-pronged approach when you're talking about how to protect your data, and it also should be an understanding of once again, what do I look like from a cyber attack perspective? Who are those threat actors that could be that are interested in me? What is happening in my geography? What is happening in my industry? What is happening in my tech stack? And ensuring that from a cyber attack perspective, understanding what is happening in your landscape, and ensuring that your data governance and your data controls that you have to protect your data is sufficient. And if it's not sufficient, then you should be able to readdress that. Align your capabilities. And when we talk about capabilities, we're talking about people, process, technology, and now we talk about culture. And is there anything that you need to do to either fill up a gap in your control, or bring in a new technology or new process? So getting that one, which is getting the developing the data strategy with your data governance, and then two, continuous visibility of one, what does your external threat landscape look like? Two, what are the controls, and are the controls effective enough for the protection of that data? And three, if you're sharing it out with third parties, what is the cyber hygiene of those third parties that are managing your data?
Sam, is it
Thank you,
fair
Jae.
to say, to kind of sum up, that it's not really about accessing or denying access to your data, but it's more so about how do you govern your data and how do you secure your data control? The security control is probably the more emphasis on this topic. Is that correct understanding?
Yes, that's correct. What is the life cycle?
All right. So there you go,
Yeah.
folks. It's about the
If
life
I
cycle more
can-
so than the access itself. Yes, Thibault, please go ahead.
Yeah. Just to add some point, because as some people may know, Rakuten is a marketplace, B2C marketplace. So we have some sellers and we have also some buyers. So sellers can have to share some data, and buyers need to share some data also. And sometimes it's a big personal data as credit cards info, payment data, or maybe, of course, if they want to receive the products, they need to share the address, sometimes the digicode to access to the apartment, etc. So, of course, what Sam says, it's really important to manage your data inside your companies to be sure that the data will not be shared on every people in your company or in your website, but also with your first party, because you need to be sure and clear that the data that you will share will not be sold or dispatched anywhere in the world, because many people, and I talk for Rakuten, of course, but as a marketplace, we have some big information about customers, and of course with some sellers, because we need to do some people may know a KYC, or know your customers, and we need to ask many documents for companies, etc. So we need to take this data to be sure that the documents are well protected and not shared with anyone and anywhere in the world. And we are the how do we say, the people in charge of this data, and it's our duties to protect it. And I spoke as a Rakuten, as a data manager in terms of companies, of course.
Yeah. And Thibault, if you don't mind, can I just add just one more point onto that? Is the protection and the detection controls and the monitoring controls is very important. Equally important is the response. So if there is a breach, what do you need to do about it? And it's vital for organizations to be prepared for that as well. So in the eventuality that there is a breach, they are clear, you know, the organization knows exactly what they have to do, the roles and responsibilities, and the different departments that need to get involved to manage that.
Thank you for both the insight. I think this naturally brings us to the final topic of today, which is related to vendor due diligence. But I believe from the previous questions that we have talked about, it also was related about that data breaches or cybersecurity is not only pertaining to the service, but it's also a culture, it's also internal processes and operation that we need to be aware about. So having said that, cyber attacks and data breaches often occur not through just direct penetration to a system or service, but also through a form and fashion of external touch points, such as through vendor integrations, product dependencies, like Thibault mentioned today and emphasized. So how do we guide our partners? I think Thibault touched this on as well with being a marketplace, so that the partners also stay on the same page as your organization in terms of policies and processes that are already set in place in order to manage the risk originating from third parties, not within. Thibault, would you care to chime in on this, since you have been emphasizing about this specific topic today?
Yeah, of course. So I will add maybe some quiet points, but yeah, in terms of policies, it means that we work with partners inside of Rakuten. So as I told you earlier, we talk about the sellers that need to send some documents for KYC documents. So we decided to work with a company directly inside Rakuten, so Rakuten European Bank. And it's allow us to be sure that the document and data are protected because it's in our companies, and we can be sure that third party will not are not outside of our company. So that's kind of something we focused and we take care about Rakuten. In terms of risk and organization in Rakuten, we create a direct work group inside of Rakuten with some legal, HR and IT, but also with marketing and commercial team, because we need to understand that data come from everywhere in any kind of teams in your company. So we need to be sure that every people in the company are well know the dangers and what we need to do with our data. And of course, as we are a French company, we have some many legal parts as RGPDs, and of course we focused and we stay on what RGPDs need, and we of course are how do we say compliance with RGPD's rules and law.
Sam, could you also share some suggestions how an organization could also downstream its own policy into a third party or a vendor?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with the organizations, it's understanding what is the minimum baseline, right? Whether you're dealing with standards, policies, whether you're dealing with SaaS, whether you're doing on-prem, basically it needs to be a baseline requirements, right? And that requirement should fit in to a process, another life cycle, as it were, for third-party security due diligence, right? So if we think about sort of a 5-step approach, right? So plan, assess, contract, manage, recontract, right? So when you're talking about planning, you're looking at planning phase, identifying all vendors and potential vendors, right? And these could be third parties, these could be fourth parties. And within that, you're basically looking at your requirements, not necessarily just from a security perspective, but also from from a cyber perspective, but also from a business side of things, right? Then you do your due diligence, and on that due diligence, you're basically looking at the vendor list against your requirements and their compliance and governance to the expected security controls, right? Then when we look at contracting, contracting is really the issuance of the contract. Now, when you've done this sort of DD process, which is the step before, some companies may say, hey, you know, we don't have two controls, or we don't have a password policy, and we negotiate with the scratch. Now, that then is, or that requirement is then stitched into a contract. So you issue a 12-month contract or whatever it is, and in that there's a clause to say, okay, you've got 4 months to fix these controls, and if they're not fixed, then we have the right to maybe terminate the contract or look elsewhere. So it's empowering you as an organization to understand what your third party is going to be doing, how they're dealing with things like privileged access, admin accounts, your data, and ultimately what is their cyber hygiene. And if there's any gaps at the point of that discussion, being able to put that into your contract and say, well, okay, this is now contractually binding. You need to, you need to uplift your cyber hygiene, and that's obviously the contract. And then it's really vendor management, and vendor management will have sort of, I would say, 2 phases. One which is ongoing. So as an organization, you want to be able to, one, have that face-to-face discussion with them to say, okay, how are things going? But 2, you want to also be able to have that visibility of their external threat landscape of your third party to ensure, their critical vulnerabilities and exposures are being dealt with in a timely manner. They've got no data breaches on their side. There's no impact in terms of brand impersonation or impersonation of their executives, or any data breaches, or and through the data breaches, what type of passwords are these individuals using, right? Because at the end of the day, if there is a data breach on that side, and there is credentials being traded on the dark web that will give access to that third party or fourth party, that is a potential traverse from that third party into your organization. And then the second point of that is really the recontracting or termination, right? And then that will go back to sort of, I would say, the plan and the plan due diligence and contracting phase. So, I would look at that from a life cycle perspective, but that is underpinned by your baseline cyber standards and policies that you are expecting that your third party or fourth party to be adhering to. Now, last point, this is not just technology, standards and policies. It should be technology, process, and also people. How are they managing people? How are they managing security awareness? How often is that being done? How are they checking the effectiveness? These type of things need to be also considered. Thank you, Jae.
Thank you so much. I would like to remind the audience, what you have just shared also does link with, I believe, what Thibault has also shared just briefly before with the other topic about managing customers, or also as a marketplace, how you deal with your partners. And it also links with your previous comment made earlier, Sam, about how it's a cultural thing that has to be from top down, from management, the buy-ins. Because all in all, as a result, what you're suggesting to the audience with this final comment is that cybersecurity also is required to influence a commercial agreement or engagement. And if we don't have the buy-ins of management in terms of the understanding and the acceptance, I believe it will be rather more difficult to dissolve these kind of aspects into even a commercial agreement or a conversation. So I think this was a very important emphasis. Now, I want to be time sensitive. We do have a question that was raised. Today's discussion so far has been more revolved around generic cyber attacks. Are there any specific areas peculiar to supply chain on this front that is not relevant to other industries? I do have a quick comment on this, but please care to join if you have a suggested response. I would like to just quickly comment that I think generically, it is also fundamentally not different from other industry in terms of supply chain. However, there is an emphasis that I'd like to share with the audience, which is also an aspect of cybersecurity in the aspect of response, as Sam pointed out the importance of, which is called disaster recovery. Because supply chain is a system, is a service, also a product and an experience that has to have continuity always. Just because a service is being attacked or there is data breach, the real life element of what a supply chain needs to be cannot stop. Therefore, the disaster recovery strategy and policy and procedure, I believe, could be an emphasis that maybe has a difference of priority, relatively speaking, compared to other internet businesses. Not that it's less important, let's say in social media, but I would have to say there is a bit of emphasis in supply chain with the aspect of disaster recovery because of the nature of the business itself. Sam or Thibault, any other comments?
Yeah, just very quickly. So I would say disaster recovery, absolutely. That is more of the outcome after there has been a breach, but ideally, as an organization, you should be prepared for that. But you want to be able to be one step ahead of the cyber criminals, and to do that, you need to understand yourself and understand the enemy, right? So with that, you need an outside in approach to understand what your entire external threat landscape looks like, not only just your organization, your third party, your fourth parties. What are the inroads into that organization? What are the vulnerabilities, critical vulnerabilities? What are the critical exposures? And combining that with who are the threat actors that are interested in you, why are they interested in you, what are they interested in, and how ready are they to come and attack you, right? I do with not only tactical sort of decision making on what you need to do, whether there are any cyber criminals that are either targeting you as a company, or your industry, or your technology stack, or even what is happening in your geography, but also give you that level of insights to take up to senior executives to say, hey, there's something happening over in the US, and they're targeting our industry. These are the threat actors. These are their strengths and weaknesses. If we overlay that with our cyber controls, there's 2 or 3 things here that we need to uplift so we can proactively address them. So, that I would say would be a very key point in terms of being able to manage this from a third-party perspective. Thanks, Jae.
Yeah, I agree with Sam, but we also at Rakuten faced some attack, and just to be sure, as Sam say, we need to know why attackers want to have our data and how we can protect from our cyber attackers. But sometimes, and it's happened to Rakuten, we were attacked. Some may know the SolarWinds attacks. It was an attack from into the Orion IT update tools, and I think I was talked about earlier, but it's only our suppliers who were attacked, and we were how do we say, collateral damage. And that's why of course Sam is right, and we also need to focus on which providers we work and be sure that the provider we have a strong securities, because we sometimes be collateral damages, and it's quite part of not our fault, and we need to be sure that inside our companies, but also outside. And we talk about third party. We say the third party when we give some data, but also people who allow us to manage the data can be a dangerous side.
Thank you, Thibault. I greatly appreciate our panelists for sharing your thoughts and suggest the best practices related to cybersecurity and data governance today. Before we close, how can our audience reach out to both of you directly after the webinar?
I'm on LinkedIn, so if you just search for me, Sam Parmar, spelled P-A-R-M-A-R, that'll be fantastic. More than happy to talk about how we can help your organization.
Yeah, and also you can find me on LinkedIn with my name right on the webinar, and of course Rakuten can help you into fulfillment parts, logistics, and if you are looking for sales in Europe through our fulfillment service, of course we are ready to work with you and happy to talk with you.
This is great. Lastly, I'd like to thank everyone who took time to join us today. It was a great pleasure hosting today's session. Cheers, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Thibault.
Thanks. Bye-bye.